Can't hear the feed cam since you muted. So give me a clue. Cue. Dun, 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 dun. I'm pretending like I'm hearing the music, Jackie. We live? Hey, 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 it's another groovy day, and that's because I make it that way. Every day when I get up, I decide it's going to be groovy, and when my feet hit the floor, that's the way I take off and do life. That's what I do, and if things change or something happens, I always think back, and I started off groovy. I can turn this around and just keep right on trucking. That's what I do. You know, I'd be curious to know what you do. How do you do life? We're going to talk about that today on today's show. Just take a minute. Take a minute and get yourself centered and situated and ready for Life Mastery Radio, the talk show that brings you great thoughts and ideas for you to use on your very own life mastery journey. As always, I have my co-host with me today, Jackie Bailey. Not really my co-host, one of my good friends, I think. Aren't you one of my good friends, Jackie?
Yes, I am. We've been friends for a long time.
How are you today, my friend?
Doing well. Yeah, doing really well.
I'm doing exceptionally well considering what I've been through the last 5 days. Oh my gosh, that was just terrible. I got the Omicron. I think I have not been tested, but there is nothing else that would get me like that. And getting through it. And now I think I'm, how do they call it? Super vaccinated. I've been vaccinated and I got the text to be boosted on the day that I got sick. So that was a little late in coming.
So you've had a natural booster now.
Natural booster and yeah. Whee!
Yay!
That was fun. I don't want to do that again though.
Oh.
And you just got back from a cruise.
Yes, we went on a Concerts at Sea tour, and there were musicians there from 60s and 70s that were performing for our private group of about 500 people. And it was delightful. I met Florence LaRue from the Fifth Dimension, and she's agreed to be a guest on our show. So we're looking forward to having her on the show perhaps in April.
Oh man, that's a trip back in time. That's really cool.
Yeah.
That is really cool. So this is a rock and roll cruise. Did the bands play every day? I mean, you were gone for like 7 days, I think.
There were 4 or 5 headlining bands that played on a different day. And then on the last day, they all got together and jammed. So we had Brian Nyland, who sang Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny Yellow Polka Dot Bikini and Sealed with a Kiss. That's his claim to fame. And so he was there and performed for us. Gary Puckett and the Union Gap.
I bet Arnie was just in heaven.
Was. And then my husband Arnie is on, he's with Paul Revere's Raiders, which used to be Paul Revere and the Raiders. And so they performed and did a fantastic job. There were several musicians, however, that had been tested positive for COVID prior to getting on the ship. And so they couldn't be there. Mostly bass players. For some reason, bass players have very bad immunity systems. and so they had to kind of swap bass players around between the performers. But it was great. It was a great time, great ports. Warm weather. It was fun. And I actually got to swim with a dolphin. Actually danced with a dolphin. Her name was Sophia. That was the highlight for me.
Did you get video?
Don't have video, but do have images.
Pictures?
Yeah.
That was cool.
She kissed me.
So that's curious that you did that. That's funny. And so did you get the feeling of like a sentient being? Was there a connection? Did you establish a connection with that dolphin?
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I felt like I was so excited to be there, and I got to tell her that I loved her, and say kind things to her. And she, like I said, she kissed me back. She didn't kiss anybody else in our group, but she kissed me back. So I think there was some sort of connection there. But it was just fun to be with this, like you said, this wonderful being who she was 9 years old, and in captivity they live up to 35. So she's young, and she danced with me and everything. So it was good. It was an enjoyable thing.
So cool. Just looking at the smile on your face, I could feel that energy of how exciting that was. So
that's what my husband said. He goes, I've never seen you smile like that before.
Right.
Yeah, it was great.
So how's things at
Speak Feed Lead? Yes, you've frozen a little bit.
Lead org project.
Yeah. Well, we are starting some classes. We've got a class starting today for grades 4 and 5 in public speaking and leadership. And we've got a class starting on Thursday for the middle school age. And I'm going to put a plea out there. We've got a student who really wants to be part of the middle school classes that are beginning, and her family's in troubled times and they can't afford to pay even the discounted tuition. And so I'm putting it out there for any of you who would like to help to sponsor this young girl. We only need about $247 now to complete the amount of her enrollment fees so that she can be in this 8-week class. And so if you'd like to be part of helping this young girl gain confidence and courage and find her voice, you can go to my website, which is on the screen below me, JackieBailey360.com. And there's a little link that'll say sponsor a youth, sponsor a child. And click on that and you'll be able to help us with S. We know her name is S. We're not putting all the information out there, but she's S and she's in 7th grade. Wow. So we'd love your help with that.
Yeah. Get a hold of Jackie. I mean, it's so empowering to watch these kids go through her teaching and find their voice, find their heart, find what's important to them. And really, it's just like waking up to the world. I mean, it's just amazing.
Well, this is exciting too. We left on the ship from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and I have a student currently in Fort Lauderdale. He's been my student for a year and a half, and I've never met him in person. So we had dinner with his family while we were in Fort Lauderdale on Saturday night. And it was awesome to actually see that he's much more than a video. It was very exciting.
Yeah, you're just walking into all kinds of opportunities. That's so cool.
Yeah,
so
that's
very
great.
Cool. I want to remind our listeners, today's show page is at www.lifemasteryradio.net or .com. Which one you prefer is up to you, your choice. And any links that we talk about, today's show page is right there. And a link to our guest's website is there. And anything else that we talk about will be there after the show. While you're there, sign up for the newsletter. Jackie puts out a newsletter once a week, highlights who's been on the show, who's coming on the show, and a blog post about the most recent show. So it's pretty cool. That's all we use that email address for. And if you're just kind of surfing around on Life Mastery Radio's website, you can see my book. You can follow the link, get it at Amazon. Jackie has a book. Where's Jack?
It's behind me, actually. I don't have it within reach.
Self-Centered Leadership. You can find that link and you'll love both books. And please, please, please leave us some feedback. Jackie and I are both, what are we? We're pots. We're just we're just pots, plain old Toastmasters now, but we definitely climbed the ladder in Toastmasters leadership. So you can check
still
it out.
Still mentoring others, still supporting others and finding their voices.
That's what we do. Okay. What else? What else do we need? Our guest is being so patient. Look at her big smile on her face.
Awesome. We're going to have a great discussion today.
Ready for the show? Let's do this show. Our guest today is Clare Goldsberry, and she is the author of a wonderful book that will take you to a different understanding, for sure. The name of her book is The Illusion of Life and Death, Mind, Consciousness, and Eternal Being. After helping her significant other, Brent, go through 18 months of living with and eventually dying from esophageal cancer, Clare wanted to share not only his story of fearless living and graceful dying, but also include the broader picture of what living fearlessly and dying gracefully means for all of us. As a hospice volunteer for 2 years after Brent's death, she became acutely aware of just how important it is for the dying person and the dying person's family and friends to understand living and dying. Since childhood, Clare has been engaged in the study of religion and spiritual traditions. Her interests have taken her along many different paths, from Protestant Christianity, where at one time her ambition was to become a minister, into Mormonism, where her perspective and organized religion changed, and then into a study of the ageless wisdom traditions, Gnosticism, one of my favorites, and finally into the Eastern philosophies of Hinduism, Buddhism. In her most recent book, The Illusion of Life and Death, Mind, Consciousness, and an Eternal Being, she provides a profound view of living and dying as seen through the ages of those who have sought answers regarding the most mysterious aspect of life, this thing we call death. Clare, good day, my friend. How are you?
Good day. I'm great. Thank you very much for having me.
So in all of your studies and religious explorations, I mean, we all have this knowing, want to know, right? We want to know. Did that help you then with your beloved's passing or going through that, or was this all a new experience?
Well, in a way, it was all a new experience. I had just started studying the Eastern philosophies, particularly I started out in Buddhism. And I think that was the thing that really got me thinking about death, which was a good thing, because just about 5 years later, I would get to experience close up what it is to have a loved one, be diagnosed with a terminal illness, and to go through that process with him of his illness, and then dying, and then his death. So I think that Buddhism introduced me to death in a way that I'd never been introduced to it before. We didn't talk a whole lot about death and dying as part of my Protestant Christianity upbringing. So entering into Buddhism in about 1995, I was taught about death and dying. And in fact, it was interesting because death was a big part of our learning at the Sangha, to remember death, to always remember that death is certain, the time of our death is uncertain. And so there was always this death awareness that we were taught. And it didn't really mean a whole lot to me until Brent got his diagnosis of esophageal cancer and was told, well, you have maybe 6 months, maybe a year to live if you take all the treatments, which he refused. But he did have surgery, but he refused all the other treatments. And
so he had a laryngectomy. Is that what it was?
No, it was esophageal. It was down near his stomach. And so they removed just that part of his esophagus, near to the stomach. And so that was really, to him, he wanted to live his life as he wanted to live it. And he said, I'm not going to have the last days, months, weeks, however long of my life be just rounds of doctor's appointments and treatments and so forth. In fact, he told the oncologist that we were sent to see at first, he said, no, I'm not going to have your treatments. And the oncologist said, well, you're going to die if you don't do everything I tell you to do. And Brent said, dude, I'm going to die anyway.
Right.
So, I mean, and Brent had a great sense of humor, and he had a fearless way of looking at life. He just never, his own father died of stomach cancer when Brent was 16. So, and he said that kind of showed him that we can face life and go on and live our lives, even in the face of death because we know we're going to die. We all say that, but we say it like, oh yeah, we know we're going to die. And but do we really believe it? Maybe not so much until we're really faced with it. And I think that it's very upfront in our face, particularly in these last 2 years. And I really think that although I wanted to publish the book a lot earlier, there is a time for everything. And maybe it was the time, for this book. And I hope it helps people.
I was reading his account and your account of his account. And it seemed like, as he neared the end, he made the comment of he thought it would be harder. What was it? Was it you that helped him with that understanding, or was that inherent to his understanding?
Right. That was inherent to his understanding. He was never really afraid of, in fact, he saw the benefits of knowing when he was going to die, about when he was going to die and what he was going to die of. The story that I wrote about in the book where he had been talking on the phone one day. He worked right up until like 3 weeks before he died. Wow. And he was on the phone with a client one day and talking and laughing and so forth. And his colleague came into his cubicle and when he was done and said, how can you be so happy knowing you're going to die? And Brent just kind of smiled and he told her, he said, we're all going to die. He said, but I'm lucky. I know about when I'm going to die and what I'm going to die of. And he said, and that to me, the mystery now is gone. Everybody else still lives with that mystery. Yeah. And the uncertainty. And I think that's what people are really afraid of in this whole death and dying conversation. It's the uncertainty, because we truly don't know when we're going to die, but we do know we are going to die.
So what were Brent's final moments like, and where do you think he is now?
Well, he was, when his final morning and early afternoon before he died, that's when he made that comment that he said, dying is so easy. He said, I thought it would be harder than this, but it's just so easy. And I think that's the thing that I like to leave with people, and I like to remember myself is, that when we embrace all as the path, when we accept the fact that there are things about life that will change, and there's often things that we cannot do about that change except to go with the flow. And he was kind of a go with the flow kind of guy. So I really think that the last couple of hours of his life were just very peaceful. He didn't really talk much the last couple of hours.
Was he at home?
He was at home. Yes, we had hospice. Hospice kind of left us alone because they figured we had a handle on this whole death and dying thing. So but they were there for us, they came by, and checked on him, periodically and so forth. But he did die at home. And fortunately, I had also been studying the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and especially the section on the dying process. And that really helped a lot, because I think without that understanding, it would have been harder on me. But to see the process as it was in that section of that book, I mean, all the signs and the symptoms and so forth. In fact, I told Brent before he died, I said, I'm sure glad you're dying by the book so that I know what's going on. And he thought that was rather humorous. So he smiled, and, So I think, again, it's that mystery of how we die. How do we die? And it's the uncertainty that really makes people fearful of death. And people don't even like to talk about it. Yeah. But it's a topic we all need to talk about.
That's a big motivator is fear and afraid. And so because of that fear, we block it off. And it's not really part of our conscious awareness. I know for me, in my 30s and 40s, I was indestructible, right? And the concept of dying and passing away, even in understanding, hey, at one point in my life, 20 or 30 years down the road, it's game over melody plays. And I think your teaching and your book puts it out there for people to start to understand that and plan for it and be ready.
I hope so. I mean, that's my goal. And I think we all need to think about it. And you're right, when we're in our 20s and 30s, it's interesting that people who write about wanting to live forever or wanting to live, we're going to extend life, and we're going to, it's like, okay, that's really good to talk about when you're in 20s and 30s and you are young and you are healthy and you've got the good life going. But then maybe later on, not so much. And we maybe understand more the value, of the dying process if we know about it. And I think that's where a lot of people have that fear because they don't know, and they don't know what life is. What is life from, say, a Buddhist or quantum physicist standpoint? And
well, it's interesting because the first chapter of your book is why we don't know how to die.
Yeah.
And I read that and I thought, I didn't know I was supposed to know how to die.
It helps to know how to die.
Yeah. So what is the best way to die? How do we die? I mean, like Brent obviously had this opportunity to die within a certain controlled limit
Right.
of the way he went and how and where he was and what he thought about it. Sometimes we don't have that opportunity. In fact, while I was out of town this week, a dear friend of mine lost her son to suicide, and devastation, of course, for the family and for our family as well. And so there are instances where death is such a horribly sad circumstance, contrasting in a situation like Brent, where it can be nice and peaceful. And so how do we have that good end? What is it that we need to do to ensure that our death is a good death, whatever that might mean?
Well, I think not being afraid. I think fearlessness. I think always going into it with the idea that the old Native American chieftain in that movie, and the name always, I can never remember the name of that movie, but he walks out of his tent every day and he goes, "Today is a good day to die." And it's not that you really think you're going to die today. Today is a good day. The language interpretation is, today is a good day and I will embrace anything that comes, even if that's my death. We cannot always choose how we're going to die. We just know that it will come. And if we accept that and embrace that, then we can live our life to the fullest. If you're constantly afraid of dying, you wouldn't do anything. You wouldn't even walk out of your house in the morning.
Right.
So you have to learn that fearlessness and be willing to embrace what eventually will happen.
Enter pandemic, right? I mean, so many people lived in fear the last 2 years because they were afraid
really
of death.
Sad. That's really sad, because fear can even affect your immune system.
Right.
In Ayurvedic medicine, fear can really upset your whole system. And so you have to learn to be fearless, which is something we need to practice. It could be a practice. This fearlessness can be a practice.
Really neat. I like that philosophy.
So let's just jump ahead a little bit, Claire. And I'm curious about your thoughts. What happens? What happens when we pass? I got to preface the opening of your book. You talked about all these authors that have written about death and their books, and you highlight many things. And then you just pose the question, how do they know?
That's right. That's right. Like we were told in class one night at the Buddhist center I was attending, somebody asked that we were talking about death and dying, and somebody says, well, what happens after death? And our teacher she's sitting up there on the, on her chair, and she goes, well, nobody knows what happens after we die. So it's like, so why are we talking about this? But just the idea that, what happens after death? Well, I think it's all part of the thought, the mind, because all is created in the mind by the mind, and nothing has any inherent existence from its own side. That's not only a Buddhist philosophy, it is also a quantum physics philosophy, because everything is created in the mind. Our thoughts create our reality. Mm-hmm. And so if we have good thoughts, peaceful thoughts, if we sometimes, it's like you don't even, Brent never even really thought about himself all that much. He just did his work. He went about his business. He traveled. We traveled together. And it's thoughts. Our thoughts can destroy us, or our thoughts can give us a peaceful, happy life, because our thoughts are our reality. And it's just no way of getting around it. If you have negative thoughts, you're going to have a negative life. If you're afraid all the time, what kind of a life can you have? Yeah. You can't have a peaceful life. So you just have to embrace what is, go with the flow, because flow is just allowing things to happen and not wishing things were different than they are. The people think the Buddha was so negative when, the first noble truth was life is pain and suffering. And they go, oh, that's so negative. How could the Buddha have said that? Well, life is pain and suffering was just the first noble truth. The second noble truth is you only suffer when you want life to be different than it is. In other words, if you can't embrace change, if you can't embrace what is and see the higher purpose in all things, because there is a higher purpose, and not that there is a single purpose for each person, but we each have that purpose that we need to understand in our individual lives, then you can have a fearless death and you can have a better life, because fear is a huge obstacle to living a good life. And so I think that's very important to remember, that, your thoughts create your reality.
I think there would, go ahead, Todd.
You go.
I was just going to say, I think there's probably people that struggle with that, though. Those people that live in fear, to try to convince them that that you can control that fear through thinking differently. I mean, what do you say to people that would doubt that? It's like, that's impossible. It's fear is ingrained in me because I've had these past experiences that have taught me that I have reason to fear. So why would my thoughts change that? Well,
and that's where really being able to control the mind, to tame the mind, whether it's through contemplation, meditation, a lot of little sayings have helped me along the way. Do not pursue the past. Do not pursue the past. Do not grasp after the future, because the past no longer is, the future has not yet come. All we have is the very here and now. And as Thich Nhat Hanh said, the practitioner can only dwell in stability and freedom when we've not pursued the past, when we're not constantly looking after the future, and when we live in the here and now, because that's all we have. And so we just have to learn to do that. And sometimes no matter what you say to people, it's not going to make any difference. I've had to learn my lessons in my life. I mean, the ups and downs, and and sometimes there's just nothing you can say to people. But I hope the book maybe gives people food for thought. I don't know. I hope so.
Yeah. Well, some peace, because those that suffer the most, right, are those that are left behind.
That's it. That's really true. I think Brent hit the nail on the head when he said dying is easy. Well, it's dying for the person who's engaged in the process and who is able to release the body as they move upward and out. And it is much harder on the people because we don't often understand things. And you mentioned suicide, Jackie, and that's a tough one. But I did put a chapter in there on it because I've had experiences with that, not directly, but with my ex-husband's family. And with my own children, and seeing this suicidal energy that can run through families lifetime after lifetime. And so there's the story in there of my youngest son, who's the reincarnation of his grandmother who committed suicide in 1959. And so I think that from an Eastern philosophy standpoint, from the idea of reincarnation and karma, which I talk a lot about in the book, I think it helps bring a better understanding. It certainly brought a better understanding to my youngest son when we had the conversation about this when he was 16, when a good friend of his committed suicide. And so I think it's all part of this understanding of what is life and what is death. The more we understand what is life and what is living, and what is this illusion that we call life, and what is this illusion that we call death? You know, we move from birth to birth. We move from birth to rebirth, and death is just the flip of the switch.
Yeah, birth is probably harder than death, actually. Right?
Probably.
And we all survived that.
I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here.
Yeah. Now, in talking about being able to control our thoughts and living in that fear mentality, you share an example from Harry Potter.
Oh, yeah.
That in the book. Can you share that with our listeners?
Right. Well, you know, I just said that thoughts create our reality. And whether that's thoughts of good things, it's also thoughts of the things we fear. And in Harry Potter, they were taking a class, they were learning the ridiculous spell. And the ridiculous spell involved each student thinking of the thing they feared the most. And when they thought it became real. They conjured up this, whether it was a monster, a spider, you know, some people are afraid of snakes, whatever. And as they would conjure that up, they had to take their wand, point it at the fear that they conjured into reality, and shout ridiculous. And when they shouted ridiculous, the monster or the spider or whatever became this little bitty tiny thing that went running off and disappeared. and that's a very good example. I thought, there it is. You know, our fears are based in our thoughts. And so we can, if we can control our thoughts, I think we can control our fears, because you look at a lot of the things that we're afraid of and they never come to pass.
Right.
Yeah. Most of my problems, 99% of my problems are created in my mind, and I can't even grab them and put them in a paper bag to throw them away. Right. Yet they have the ability to affect our emotions, our well-being, the way we show up in the world, just like you described. Imagine being so afraid of death or dying that you never left the house.
Yeah. And yet, you know, we know that every day people die in car wrecks, but do we get in our cars every day and go someplace? Of course we do. You know, and it never occurs to us. So it's truly everything exists in the mind, by the mind. It's all created. The mind is a creator, and our thoughts are creative. Thoughts are things.
Yeah.
You know, it's very true, Claire. Todd mentioned that I was just on a cruise. And one of the things I fear, is probably not my greatest fear, but it's something that I am fearful of, is actually snorkeling. And it's only because I'm not a very strong swimmer. And secondly, it seems so strange to me to be able to put your face in the water and breathe. You know, it's just counterintuitive, right? And the few times that I've tried snorkeling, I have done it while fearful. And I know it's probably not a good thing to do, is to be out in the ocean afraid while you're out there, because that causes panic, which is never good. But on this past cruise, we had an opportunity, of course, to snorkel, and I changed my thinking about it. And I concentrated on every moment. In fact, I even would concentrate on just my breath. I would listen to my breath, because you can hear it pretty well underwater, right? Listen to my breath and just concentrate on what I was seeing and the beautiful fish and the coral that we were experiencing. And I didn't have any fear, not 1 ounce of fear during that session, because, as you say, I changed the way I thought about it.
Yeah.
And I was able to overcome that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it really can happen. So my question for you then is, how does Buddhism help us to understand death more, so that if those people that fear death hear it, they'll feel better about that, that fear will be dissolved? So how does Buddhism help us to do that? And what's the relationship between that and quantum physics?
Well, I think that the Eastern philosophies, both Hinduism and Buddhism, there is the reincarnation involved. And I think one of the things that I've seen people afraid of growing up in Christianity was the idea that we have just this one life. This is it. This is it. You're born here and you die here, and and maybe if you did all the right things, and maybe we don't know what all the right things were or are, maybe you'll get to go to heaven. If you don't, then maybe you'll end up in hell. And so it creates, again, that uncertainty. Well, where will I go? I think the idea of reincarnation, of knowing that this is just one life, that the things that happen to us here many times have their roots in our past lives. The things that we do here will create things that we will experience in our next life. I one time heard a Buddhist teacher say, if you want to know what your past life was like, because people were asking, well, should we have past life regression? And he said, if you want to know what your past life was like, look at your current life. If you want to know what your future life will be, look at your current life. We're always creating, always creating. And I think if anything can help people, it's to know that we create heaven. Heaven in the Buddhist tradition, heaven or nirvana, is not a place we go. It is always a state of mind. Everything is a state of mind. It's not a place where we go to, but it's a place, it's where we are right now in a state of mind. And hell is the same way. I mean, there are people who are living in hell right now and they haven't gone anywhere. They're still right here.
It's created in the gray matter between my ears.
Yeah, to hell to most people is probably going to be when they recognize how much time they wasted worrying about things, right?
Boy, that's
well,
good
you
thought.
talked about that. You talked about that in your book, because you were involved in hospice after Brent's passing, and that was you said something about that was people's biggest fears, is they weren't true to themselves.
Yes, I think people often die with regrets. One of them is, I never did what I really wanted to do.
Yeah, or I did things for other people.
I did things for other people, and I never really did what I wanted to do. Yeah. They have these regrets that they should have done, they could have done, but didn't. And I think that's why it's so important to be true to yourself. And to know what your calling is. I got a calling when I was 10 years old to be a writer. Just sitting back in my thinking tree by the creek on our farm and pondering what I might be when I grew up. And the first time I ever heard my inner voice, and it said, "You're going to be a writer, Claire." My inner voice always calls me by name, I guess, so I'll sit up and listen.
Well, that's interesting, Claire, that you bring this up, because I'm fascinated with ancient wisdom, and the ancient Egyptians had a thing called the Book of the Dead. And this is something that you purchased or had created for you when you were an adult. And then that was your guide for your life. So you ensured yourself spectacular passing, right?
Right.
Isn't that the idea that you're maybe proposing, is having this understanding of your life and what occurs in life makes a difference in how you pass on?
I think it does. I think it does. I mean, it's your thoughts, it's your what you have done in your life. If you have been true to yourself, if you have discovered your life's purpose, I don't particularly think there is some inherent meaning to life. I kind of agree with Joseph Campbell on that. When
Right.
Bill Moyers asked him, what is the meaning of life? And Joseph Campbell says, well, life has no inherent meaning. You bring meaning to it. And I think that's the important thing to understand, that, yes, being able to say that, yes, I received the calling. I didn't know how I was going to accomplish it. I've done a lot of different things in my life, but ultimately, the writing kind of fell into place as I moved forward. And not that I really grasped after it or thought, yes, I have to do this. I just did what I needed to do. I just kind of walked along the path step by step, and things kind of fell into place. People say, well, how did you become, a writer? Well, I don't know. I just walked the path and things fell into my lap, and I just took advantage of the opportunities that arose. And I think that's what life is all about. And I think at the end of the day, when you get to that point where you're going to have to leave this vehicle that enabled you to do so many great things, that you can be satisfied that you did what you were supposed to do, that you followed your calling, that you found your purpose. Not that everybody will.
But morals, principles, and values.
Souls, but
morals, principles, and values is another huge part of that, right? Walking along and being compassionate and understanding. I mean, Claire, I got to tell you, I think it's a huge mistake getting rid of the 10 Commandments. I think Moses was onto something with those laws and giving them to people, because those were on the wall. And, well, we can say it like this: it put the fear of God into people.
And that's a big problem. They have the fear of God, and they don't want to go. They don't want to die because they're afraid God is going to do something.
And that's part of my point is that was just, Moses's way of instilling morals, principles, and values in people the easy way, I guess.
Well, think about why those came about, though, is because the Israelites had been slaves for decades, right? And they didn't know, they had no free choice.
Right.
And now they were given choice. And so they needed to have some direction with this newfound freedom that they had. Right. And so it's the 10 Commandments were then given to allow them opportunity to figure out how to live a better life,
right,
given this new choice that they had. And so, and that can directly relate to some of these people who live in fear because they've taken their own choice away. They just allow the reaction to always happen rather than be on the offensive all the time. They're always defensively reacting to things. And so I think the 10 Commandments were allowing them to then be on the offensive and live life a particular way that they've never been able to do before. So in that regard, I think it is still important. Right. And I was going to ask Claire, what is non-attachment? What does that mean?
Well, non-attachment, and just a little bit of comment on the 10 Commandments. Then you had in the New Testament, you have the Apostle Paul who said, laws are for the lawbreakers. Once you get beyond the legalism and the law and learn love. So the Old Testament is the law and the legalism. The New Testament is the law of love.
It's a higher law.
It's the higher law. If you truly understand that, you don't need laws to dictate your discipline. You are self-disciplined in love.
Interesting point.
Now to the non-attachment. Well, it's a wonderful Buddhist principle. It's something I learned early on in my studies of Buddhism, and it really has benefited my life tremendously. No attachment, no aversion. It's not just non-attachment, but you don't want aversion. It's that living in equanimity that Buddhists teach, living the middle way. Because the minute you get attached, and what causes attachment is obviously thinking everything out there is real and permanent and solid.
Part of me.
And so you just, and that causes suffering. In fact, the Buddha said attachment is the root of all suffering, because what we become attached to, we fear losing. And I once heard that all fear is rooted in the fear of loss. And so non-attachment is learning to live in equanimity. Again, going with the flow. Material things are going to get lost. Friends and family are going to die. We're going to lose money. There's a lot of things we're going to lose. We'll lose our health. But to be able to just go with the flow and say, it will be okay, live in that equanimity, not aversion to things and not attachment to things.
Detachment from outcomes, right?
Attachment to outcomes, attachment to opinions. Ask me.
Ask me, I'll tell you.
I've had a hard time. I still try though. I try to,
Oh my goodness.
Attachment to preferences. Where do you want to go to lunch? I don't care, anywhere.
What an amazing book. You can hold the book up for us to see the cover. It just came out January 4th.
Yes.
And Claire, I'm really curious. I always ask my guests this. Have you heard from people? What are people saying about that book?
I think the most comments that I've heard about the book are, boy, do we really need a book like this right now.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that means it'll be helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure, Claire, it's going to touch a lot of people. And I think the fact that you just start with an empathetic story to relate that you've actually dealt with someone dying and helped them through that, and that they were themselves able to discover a lot of things. I think that the way to start that is with your personal story. And that's exactly what life is, right? We're creating these stories. And as long as we are sharing those stories and inspiring other people, it's going to be a great life, right? And then your death is going to feel like that was my purpose, was living my life, creating stories and inspiring others with those stories. And I think if we all lived that way, what a better place it would be, right?
Create good karma, right, Claire?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh my goodness, ladies, we only have about 3 minutes left. And Claire, thank you so much for showing up as you today with a great message, a great book,
Thank
a book
you.
that for sure would be a great tool for people on their very own life mastery journey. Because ultimately, at some point, we all have to deal with it one way or the other, and either in our own or those that are close to us and our loved ones. That's where it hurts the most.
That's true. That's true. Well, I really appreciate being able to be on your show and to talk about this topic, because it is a difficult topic to talk about for a lot of people. But I hope it becomes easier, and I hope we learn.
I think you've made it easier.
Are you still working with hospice?
No, I worked with them for a couple of years after Brent died, and then I just kind of got called away from that. And I just kind of go where I'm called.
Yeah.
And I've always been involved with nonprofit organizations and helping people, and so it's always been a big part of my life. So
where would people go if they want to call you? Where would they go to find stuff about you?
You can go to my website. It's claregoldsberry.com, and that's ClareGoldsberry.com.
And there's a link. There's a link on today's show page at www.lifemasteryradio.net or .com. Jackie, quick, 2 minutes. Any takeaways for today?
Well, I want to thank you, Claire, for your time at hospice. When I've had parents that have been in hospice, and I recognize the value that it is, and the fact that you bring a varied perspective of life and death with you to those families, I'm sure has been a blessing for them. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
No,
Thank you.
that's awesome service. That's about all we have time for today. Thank you again, Claire. That just rocked. Will you come back?
I will. I will.
Okay, we'll talk about some other things. There's so much more to talk about. And did you have a blast today? Did I fulfill a promise?
Yes, yes, I really enjoyed it. I really did. I'm so nice to meet both of you.
That's about all we have time for today. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please tell a friend about the show. We have such amazing guests, and Jackie and I just have a blast every week, and she creates these amazing blog posts about the show and the newsletter, and everything's really cool with Life Mastery Radio.
We're cool. We're totally cool.
And don't forget groovy. We groove.
Groovy and cool.
Jackie's really she gets really in the groove, and I just wake up groovy. So that's lastly, please make it a great day, because it is all about choice. Bye-bye for now.
Bye, everybody.